Purple premonitions petrify. Prevalent paranoia permeates. Pack pragmatically, people. Am I having a stroke? Hell boy, I might be. Welcome to Channel 8.5. Hello, and thank you for joining us at Channel 8.5, a show about movies and TV and pop culture. My name is Joe Galena.
And I'm Andrew Hanna.
Andrew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Joe. Following the premiere of Lovecraft Country last week, we felt it was appropriate to further explore Lovecraft's horror or cosmic horror in film and television. So I was thinking a good place to start is we maybe briefly discuss kind of the elements that go into Lovecraftian horror. Went over it a little bit last episode, but
a little bit.
I think that's a good place to start.
Lovecraft is one of the most influential writers, not just in terms of novels, but translated into screen. His work, for whatever reason, has transcended just blazing racism to still be adapted. It's true, though. It's weird. Yeah. Think about that. Think about how racist H.P. Lovecraft was, and yet people will still be adapting his stuff. If some other writer, J.K. Rowling is a great example of this, right? Mm-hmm. The recent comments that she made about, transgendered people. I don't want to get into that. We're not doing politics on this.
Yeah.
We're talking about tentacle monsters on this show. But, there was a lot of controversy around her, just what she said. And, would people want to keep adapting even the Fantastic Beasts movies after the controversy? Maybe it's because his stories were written so long ago, probably about 100 years ago now. Maybe people look at him and think of, look at his weird rectangle head and go, who cares? He's an old dead guy. The stories are the ones that matter.
That's an interesting point that I think Lovecraft Country directly addresses in the first 10 minutes, is the separation of the work from the artist, which I think a lot of people disagree with, rightfully so, in consuming art created by people who either harbor harmful beliefs or have literally harmed someone else. You're subsequently supporting them financially. So it's tough, right? Why do I separate Lovecraft's work but can't with someone like Chris Brown? I think there's a lot of factors that go into it. For instance, Lovecraft will no longer profit from my consumption of his work, and I openly recognize that some of the beliefs he subscribes to are evil. But another factor is growth and change, right? No one is perfect. We have all, at one point or another, felt it appropriate to hold beliefs or say things that we would definitely not say today, which is a product of growth and maturity. And I think the reason someone like Kevin Hart was able to get past the recent controversy is the fact that maybe his art explored an offensive concept and that maybe he might not actually carry those beliefs, at which point I think separation is necessary. However, more than that, it's the acknowledgement that if you did hold those beliefs at one point, you've learned and grown to realize why they're hurtful. I don't think there's any one way to look at it, and it should be considered with a bit of nuance. I mean, there are some artists that I'll stop supporting right off the bat, and then there are some where I can separate it. Kanye West, perfect example.
But nevertheless, when I think of Lovecraft in the popular culture, I don't think it's true to the nature of what his stories were, because really, when you think of Lovecraft, you have to think of the monsters he created. Cthulhu is a perfect example that has permeated pop culture in a way that the stories that Cthulhu is in have not.
Yeah.
People know what Cthulhu is, a giant, essentially squid monster that lies in the ocean. That is what Cthulhu is. It's on posters, it's on mugs, there's merchandising.
Yeah.
But really, the fact that a lot of the monsters that Lovecraft created were, squid-like or tentacle monsters is the one I keep using because, it's the most apt description for them. The monsters themselves weren't the point, but the existence of the monsters was the ultimate point of the stories. And the fact that something so outlandish and so alien and so powerful, big, Cthulhu is a very monster, giant, can exist, drives people insane. And so the themes of that haven't really crossed into pop culture so much as the visuals.
Well, yeah. So I agree, because it's the only thing that we can explain or describe from his work, because and this goes back to what we were saying as far as his work being so difficult to translate to the screen. But I almost feel as though the elements and the themes that he presents are far more influential than the monsters he created, although the monsters he created are the things that he's known by.
Hmm.
If we want to go through some of the elements, I think one of them is definitely sort of the red pill theme.
Of the Matrix.
A character, the characters are exposed to a truth or come upon a revelation that is so immense, like you said, that it overwhelms their mind. And not necessarily learning of something that you may have doubted or thought would never happen, something like the existence of aliens is, yeah, there's likely aliens or some type of life outside of our planet or our solar system, but the likelihood of me ever coming into contact with them is not very high. Rather, it's more the awakening to something that is so far beyond our understanding of the world and the universe. This knowledge is so unbearable that it, in a sense, shatters the character's sense of reality. And it's knowledge that you can't turn back from, just like the Matrix, where he
Hmm.
says, let me out, but you're already outside. And so once you've left that door, you can't really come back. Once it enters, that knowledge enters your brain, or rather expands your brain can never shrink back to the understanding that it had. In other words, you can't get the toothpaste back into the tube. And it leads the characters to lose their minds, or from the perspective of the people around them, as crazy. So that, I think, is one of the biggest elements in his work, and a big element in a lot of the films that were influenced by his work that we're going to be talking about. So a quick list of the themes would be the red pill element, the vulnerability of humanity, the arrogance of humanity, as far as the belief that we're the center of the universe, and possibly the biggest one is fear deriving from the ambiguous.
And yet, when you think of Lovecraft on the screen, the Lovecraft aesthetic, what's the first thing you think of?
Well, Guillermo Del Toro is probably the first director, because he's so open about the influence that Lovecraft has had on his work.
See, that's what I thought of too, is the
Yeah.
visuals of Guillermo del Toro's work,
Hmm.
the monsters that he creates. The tone of them, though, I would argue, is the opposite of Lovecraft.
Yeah, it's more based in fantasy. It's not necessarily horror as much as he'd like to classify his work as horror. It does have horror elements, but I don't think that it's, because we talked about this briefly last week as
Mhm.
far as Guillermo del Toro being influenced by H.P. Lovecraft. And the more I thought about it, I'm like, okay, well, which movies? And other than maybe Hellboy 2 with the
Hellboy and Hellboy, the world that exists outside of what normal people know. The fact that
yeah.
Hellboy himself exists, Doug Jones's character,
Mhm.
Abe Sapien, talking amphibious creature, all of that is Lovecraftian, and the monsters that Hellboy fights could look like they stepped off the page from a Lovecraft story.
Mhm.
But I would say Del Toro does the opposite of Lovecraft, whereas Lovecraft's monsters would drive people insane, and they were described as so ugly and so hideous and so overwhelming that they could not even be described. And that
Yeah.
the tentacle nature of them is the closest thing that the characters in the stories could describe to the audience.
Mhm.
But that's not really what they looked like. And that's the whole thing of why Lovecraft, I think, is so difficult to adapt, is because so much of it is left up to the mind in the reader that it's different for everybody.
No, but I understand what you're saying. Is Guillermo del Toro, I agree, goes the opposite way, where Lovecraft's monsters will be so shocking in their appearance or what they represent
Yeah,
that it has a negative effect on his characters, whereas Guillermo del Toro, his main characters almost learn from the monsters how to be better humans, in a sense, just like in The Shape of Water. Or Hellboy himself is a monster,
exactly.
however, he's kind and he's caring and he's fighting against his inner, I mean, no pun intended, but inner demons,
Yeah.
to go back to his kind of nature.
Del Toro seems to find love in the monsters and not horror.
Yes, he has kind of a childlike wonderment for monsters in general.
Exactly.
That's really who he is.
Shape of Water is a perfect example. Shape of Water, the fishman in that is hideous. He is hideous. I find the fishman in the Shape of Water so difficult to look at. It's a beautiful
Really?
Yes, I do. It's a beautiful movie, and all the performances are wonderful. It's a lovely story.
Yeah.
incredibly well shot, gorgeous to look at,
Oh, it's
but I
beautiful.
just don't care about fish people. He looks like a pineapple who's really oily. He looks difficult to touch. I'm just
Yeah,
saying.
no, yeah, I understand what you're saying. I'm not saying that I could ever have an intimate relationship with a fish, but I'm okay with like, a lot of people were almost offended by it. They're like, "Oh, this is like bestiality." And I'm like, "Y'all been watching Beauty and the Beast all these years and haven't said a word. And when it comes to a fish, seriously, like, this is the line we're gonna draw? Like, calm down.
That's true.
Leave him alone." So, I didn't mind it as much because I didn't really see him as a fish person necessarily. I think I could see through that into the metaphor that he was trying to make because the film was set in the 1950s,
Yeah.
a time where anyone who was not white, straight, and male was treated as other, and the main character is deaf, where
Mhm.
most times it'd be considered a deformity. And for some reason, God has taken your hearing from you because of something you did against him, in a sense. And that's how they took it. Her best friend is gay, and her other friend is a black woman. And so the fish man is really just a representation of being different, and that's why Michael Shannon's character is the epitome of the establishment
Mhm.
and how much they hold on to the status quo, and maintaining purity in their country, in their bloodlines, things like that. So I almost didn't even realize it until after, when people were like, "I can't believe she did it with a fish," and I was like, "Oh, I guess I that wasn't really what I came out of it with," right? So it was interesting. But I would say the most Lovecraftian monster of Del Toro's is probably the thing that eats babies in Pan's Labyrinth,
That's true.
because that thing was freaky the
Yeah.
first time I saw it. And so that is probably the closest thing that I think Guillermo del Toro has gone. Even the fawn has sort of ambiguous intent,
The
where
fawn
he
is not a horrific creature. It's more neutral than anything else, but you'd
Mhm.
never sit there and go, "I'm overwhelmed by this thing and its presence," and she doesn't in the movie either. She
Yeah.
is more intrigued by the fawn than anything else.
Exactly, yeah. And even the way that the fawn acts, because he's putting her through all of these sort of dangerous tests for a young girl to be partaking in, that you're thinking to yourself, I wonder if he is the antagonist of the story, but in reality he's her guide
Yeah.
into her lineage, in a sense. And so he looks evil, he looks scary, but really he isn't. And that goes back to a lot of Guillermo del Toro's themes. He loves taking the ugly, or what is seemingly ugly, and making it actually good, actually beautiful. Be it Hellboy, Shape of Water, The Fawn.
Yeah.
That goes back to translating Lovecraftian horror on screen, is many times the creatures are many things or one thing. I was reading this one passage from Lovecraft's works, and I forgot what it was, but he's describing the beast using terms that are based in our reality, but then over the course of the description, he becomes less physical and more abstract, where he starts talking
Mhm.
about oblivion or the universe, where he starts using really abstract terms. And I think that has a lot to do with his works, where it can't necessarily describe them in physical terms, other than
Yeah.
Cthulhu. That's the obvious one, but a lot of times they don't even have a physical form. And
One of the most famous Lovecraftian monsters is from a story called The Color Out of Space, which the monster is literally a menacing shade of purple.
yeah,
It's just a
yeah,
color, the color purple in a, like, glow cloud
hmm,
type of ethereal form, and
yeah,
that's all it is, and that's one of the most adapted Lovecraft stories is The Color Out of Space. I didn't watch it.
hmm,
I wish I should have watched it for this episode, but recently it was adapted a couple of years ago. Nicolas Cage starred in an adaptation of it, and apparently it's very good. It's one
oh
of the
really?
very few direct Lovecraft adaptations that are good, because most Lovecraft adaptations
They're not
are
great.
are not great, and the best ones are not his work, but influenced heavily by his work, which I
Yeah.
think is interesting.
Yeah, yeah, no, and that's what I noticed while I was doing research. A lot of the things that were considered cosmic horror were not direct adaptations. Rather,
No.
they were influenced by the ideas and the themes that he was sort of presenting.
I mean, Del Toro also, you think of Del Toro when you think of Lovecraft, because he's for so long wanted to make At the Mountains of Madness, which is a
Mhm.
Lovecraft novella that he seemingly wanted to make for a million years. and
Yeah.
never has gotten the opportunity to make. You can find a script of it online, an old draft, because I looked it up and I read it a long time ago.
Mhm.
And I remember reading the script. It's not that great, I think, because it really is just a creature feature. It's about kind of like The Thing, also, which
I was about to talk about The Thing, yeah,
John
because I feel like
Carpenter.
that was the closest thing to
Mhm.
at the Mountain of Madness.
It is both set in Antarctica. It's
Mhm.
about an expedition to Antarctica to investigate a shipwreck
Yeah.
and the aftermath. And
Mhm.
the script in at the Mountains of Madness essentially deals with this crew that gets attacked by various tentacle monsters and such,
Yeah.
and then actual Cthulhu shows up at the end. But it doesn't take a lot of the horror elements. It's more of an action movie.
Yeah, Lovecraftian fiction, from my understanding, a lot of times it might start with the focus being on the characters, and then the characters sort of fall out of relevance once you're introduced to the monsters, and the
Mhm.
monsters become the focus. I mean, no studio is going to greenlight something that doesn't have a main character or even sometimes a love interest. That was actually a lot of the issues that they had with Guillermo del Toro's adaptation.
Also, at the Mountains of Madness, though, I want to see it because part of it has giant albino penguins, blind, big penguins
Yeah.
just there, and they're just watching. They don't really do anything. They're
Yeah.
just around, and you're just looking at them going, "Those are some big ass albino penguins," and they're just there, and then they don't do anything. And I was like, "That's." I just
I
want to see it happen.
I feel like, honestly, in cosmic horror, it's more about the existence of something
Of
that
big
is more
albino penguins,
effective than even just it doing anything to you, right?
the
I
fact that
was
it's
thinking about
there.
I was thinking about The Shining when I was thinking about it, because The Shining isn't necessarily cosmic horror. It is kind of a traditional ghost story. However, it has elements that are sort of in that wheelhouse.
Stephen King takes a lot from Lovecraft as well.
Yeah, yeah. The thing about the horror genre, it always felt cheap to me, but for some reason, The Shining always stood out as one of my favorites, and I think it was because I'm drawn to a lot of the images that you see are obscure and sort of like the twins.
Mhm.
They don't necessarily have any sort of malicious intent. They never attack Danny. It's more of just their
No.
existence that's so chilling. And the same thing with the furry that's knelt down in front of the man in the hotel room.
Mhm.
There's something about it that's so unsettling that draws me to that type of horror
And
rather
to
than just
imagine
the
yourself
conventional.
in that house, if it was you wandering around this hotel going, "Am I insane? Like, this is
Yeah.
absolute madness." Also, the setting of Antarctica. The setting of Antarctica is so isolated that it's a great location for horror. Because you wanted to talk about The Thing as well, and John
Yeah,
Carpenter takes a lot of Lovecraftian things as well. I wanna talk about John Carpenter later too.
because I just saw it actually just a few months ago for the first time, but during the film, it struck me as just another kind of 80s creature feature, and by the end of it, I found
Oh,
myself
no, sir.
going no, I was, like, going
Mm-mm.
down a rabbit hole of contemplation, and and I think that that's why I love this genre so much, is because you can take something so pulpy or seemingly lowbrow, and through it communicate complex ideas and offer insight into our psyche or human nature, and it evoked a feeling of isolation on not just one level but three, whether it's just isolation in the universe, just with it being alien kind of life forms, geographic isolation like you said, Antarctica, but also isolation on a human individual level, given that the characters are isolated by the fact that anyone around them could be infected by this thing and they can only be sure of themselves, but even that is challenged later in the movie.
Oh, the ending is completely ambiguous for that purpose.
Hmm.
When Kurt Russell is just sitting there going, "Let's just wait and see a while."
Not only does it capitalize on the fear of the unknown as far as the intention of the people around them, but also they begin to fear themselves. So it's interesting to see the characters transition from the arrogance of I'm definitely not infected by the thing, and they're aggressively sure of themselves. Like
Oh,
Kurt
yeah.
Russell is about to blow the entire camp up with dynamite, but then they all begin to waver in that certainty
It
when
escalates real quickly.
oh yeah,
They're just arguing, politely amongst themselves, and then let's bring out a flamethrower.
exactly. Which you don't need a flamethrower to light dynamite. But,
Yes,
they're
you
so
do,
sure of
sir.
them.
Oh, yes, you do.
I guess in
He
a
is
movie like that, right?
he is Kurt
Kurt Russell
Russell.
looks good with a flamethrower.
Boy, does he.
But they're all certain in the fact that they're not infected until Kurt Russell begins to test the blood, and then they all just
That's
seem
the best
like,
scene in the movie.
and I'm sure they were just thinking, okay, well, I know I'm not infected, but if I was infected, would I even know it?
Exactly.
And so that goes back to just the knowledge of something as foreign and frightening to our understanding. It with that comes a doubt in everything else you once knew. I like the thing a lot. I think despite it being seemingly hokey, it actually
Is
had
it
me
be-
thinking
is it because there
afterwards.
was too much 80s synth in it for you?
It's not even the 80th synth, it's the monsters. That's another element that's prevalent is warping or deforming the familiar. The monsters or creatures resemble something in our reality. However, they exhibit deformed traits or behavior, sort of like the dogs turn into this terrifying mashup of creatures, and a human head grows legs and crawls
Mhm.
on the ceiling. All these things are familiar to us, but they take on this weird, almost defiling form of the human aesthetic. I don't know how to explain that. I think that's what terrifies me so much about Chernobyl and Pripyat. Just the
What the
effects
radiation
that,
does it to you?
yeah, radiation is one of the scariest things to me, and it's because it changes you on a molecular level.
All of a sudden, you got a third ear growing out of your forehead.
Yeah, and it's terrifying, and I think that's part of what makes this genre so effective is it almost makes you paranoid.
You know, it's interesting because Ennio Morricone did the score too, speaking of the 80s synth, and it's not like a Morricone score. He actually was more influenced by the scores that John Carpenter did for all of his movies. So even the master Morricone is getting warped into something else by the thing.
Down to the filmmakers.
Down to the filmmakers.
Did you see the remake?
Yeah, I did. I didn't care for it. They're
Was it
remaking
similar or
it was basically a exact replica, but not quite as good. But it was also a prequel. So the way that the sequel worked was that it was the
Mhm.
dog, and then at the end of the prequel, the Mary Elizabeth Winstead is the
Yeah,
star of it.
yeah.
You see the dog in the beginning of the 1982 version. At the end
Mhm.
of the 2011 version, I think that's when it came out. But so it was kind of a prequel, but also a sequel. Blumhouse is going to remake the thing on the micro budget or low budget scale,
Who's
which I mentioned.
Blumhouse again? Why do
Blumhouse
I know
did
that name?
Blumhouse did basically everything. They did The Purge. They did. I think they were producers on Get Out as well. They do all the low budget horror stuff. They did the recent Halloween remake. They're basically going to remake all of the horror franchises, but low budget.
Did they redo it?
I don't think Blumhouse was it actually, but they did most basically everything else. Blumhouse, I mean, has kind of cornered the market on low budget horror remakes, low budget horror in general, because they did The Invisible Man too, which just came out, which was apparently very good that I did not see. But they've
Really? Was
got
it good?
apparently it was good. Lee Winnell directed it, and Lee Winnell wrote Saw.
Mhm.
He also directed a movie called Upgrade, which was very good. It's not horror; it's horrific, but it's more of like a techno thriller.
You know that Universal wanted to do all the old kind of Universal
Oh
monsters
yeah,
as sort of their Marvel universe?
the Dark
And
Universe.
yeah, and apparently what was the first film that came out from it that just bombed?
Oh, you could make an argument that there were a couple of first films, Andrew, because they
It's
tried
not Van Helsing. I
it.
can tell you
No,
that
it
much.
wasn't. So Dracula Untold was the one that was supposed to kick it off.
That's right. That's
But
right. That
then
was it.
Dracula Untold didn't do very well. So then they thought, okay, The Mummy with Tom Cruise is the one that they're going to do it. And
Yeah.
then
Uh-huh.
your guy Russell Crowe played Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Have you seen The Mummy? Evidently not.
No, I did not. I like the
It's
first two.
it's a fascinating train wreck because it's just and you think the whole time that Tom Cruise should be playing Van Helsing. It would make so much sense because he's hunting the mummy. He lets the mummy
Yeah.
out, and they got to put her back because it's played by Sophia Boutella, who was
Yeah.
in Kingsman,
Mhm.
a bunch of other things. She plays the mummy. They got to put him back, and then Van Helsing recruits Tom Cruise to be, monster hunter tandem
Oh,
duo.
I didn't know Van Helsing was even part of that movie.
No, but you see, that's the thing is that he should have been Van Helsing because it would have made sense. Instead, he's just some guy played by Tom Cruise. Why wouldn't you make him Van Helsing? Maybe that was going to be a reveal later on. Who knows? I know that the Invisible Man was supposed to be part of that. I guess it wasn't. The Lee Manel version, I don't think is part of that. Johnny
Yeah.
Depp was supposed to be the Invisible Man, I think.
Oh
But there's a
god.
whole photo shoot where all the actors are photoshopped into this photo shoot, and it's Universal, the Dark Universe, coming to your screens for the next 50 years, and none of it ever happened.
Well, that's probably why they didn't want to lock themselves in with Tom Cruise, who's getting older.
I mean, Tom Cruise, Johnny Depp, Russell Crowe, like that's not exactly a young cast.
Yeah,
Sofia
that's so
Boutella
interesting. I don't.
was in that photo shoot as well, but she was the mummy and she got put back into the sarcophagus or whatever. I can't really remember at this point. Why would she
So
have been a
the
part of
so
it?
the Rock wasn't part of this at all.
The Rock. Where was The Rock involved?
The Scorpion King.
Oh,
He was the best part.
see, what's Universal thinking? They have Fast and the
Yeah,
Furious.
they
They
had
got
The
The Rock
Rock.
on speed
Yeah.
dial.
You know what? We should have Kevin Hart as Van Helsing
Yeah,
hunting the Rock.
that's genius. Do Kevin Hart as Van Helsing?
That's really funny.
That is brilliant. That was when everybody wanted a shared universe. DC wanted one. Universal
Yeah.
wanted one. It makes sense. I mean, Universal already did this. Abbott and Costello did. Abbott and Costello meets the Wolfman, meets Frankenstein, meets Dracula. Technically, Universal's already had a shared universe back in the
It's
30s,
not nec
40s.
it wasn't necessarily a shared universe in the way that Marvel is, where they all feature each other in their stories.
Oh
It
no,
was more of
it
they.
was. It was going to
Really?
be. Oh yeah, it was going to
No,
be
no, no, I know
them.
this one, the more modern one was gonna be that, but when you
Oh
think
yeah,
of The Mummy and Van Helsing, I mean, those things weren't tied together, but they were part of the Universal sort of culture. It
yeah.
was part of their
Uni-
contributions to culture.
Universal Studio Tour loved
Yeah.
promoting those monsters.
It makes sense because a lot of literature has featured them in the same
Hmm.
story together, right? So it's like Into the Woods kind of.
Oh yeah, Into the Woods did that. Basically the
Yeah.
same concept.
Yeah, exactly, with just
Where
all
Johnny
fairy
Depp
tale.
played a Wolfman. See, he's already done it.
Johnny Depp. Did you like him in Harry Potter? You like Johnny Depp though.
Yeah, I like the Pirates of
You
the
love
Caribbean movies.
pirates
I
and you
love
love Johnny
Pirates of the
Depp.
Caribbean.
I
I
like the
am
first one.
I
I love
am
the first one.
in the bag for Johnny Depp the actor, not Johnny Depp the person, because Johnny Depp the person is apparently not great, allegedly.
No, You know, it turns out that she was abusing him and he has audio of it and now everyone's turned on her.
What?
Yeah, dude. Because I was thinking that too, and then like there's audio of him like being like, "I understand you got mad, but please don't hit me anymore." And she's like, "I'm sorry, I lost my temper and stuff."
What?
I've heard the audio, and apparently everyone was like, "I knew it." Yeah, she's apparently
Wow.
batshit. I mean, they both are probably toxic for each other, but
Yeah, right.
yeah, apparently Johnny Depp is not as bad as he was painted to be.
Huh.
Which is
Interesting.
interesting. It's not a twist you're used to seeing, right?
No, not at all. Did I like Johnny Depp in Harry Potter? I didn't like the second Fantastic Beasts movie altogether.
Yeah.
And so I thought he was actually doing a really good job as Grindelwald, but the movie itself wasn't great.
I think
And the look of him, he's tough to look at.
I don't mind the look as much as the fact that they even cast him in it. Honestly, I don't like that they cast very famous actors in this because I do like Fantastic Beasts. I'm like you, I wasn't a big fan of the second movie, and the first one I thought the most charming characters were played by the actors I didn't really know that well.
And Colin Farrell.
Um,
Colin Farrell is so good in the first one.
he is good, but I don't want to see Colin Farrell in Harry Potter.
Really? Oh, I thought he was fantastic in the first one.
That's why I loved Harry Potter, like the original, is the fact that a lot of the main characters were unknowns because it is an unknown world. And I know that you can't always, obviously, most stories are unknowns, and so that's where I kind of have I don't know, I feel two ways about it.
Yeah.
But even Jude Law playing Dumbledore bothered me.
You didn't like him in his dapper suits? He had a very nice gray suit.
Oh, I think he looked good, and I think that all of them as actors did a great job. I'm not bothered by the performances. I think they all did well. I take more issue with the fact that they're such famous actors in.
I mean, the main characters are more unknown. Catherine Watterson isn't very well known. Alison Sudol isn't very well known. And even Eddie Redmayne. The public might not know Eddie Redmayne
Yeah,
by
and that's
name.
why I think Eddie Redmayne is kind of perfect for it. And then Dan Fogler, he was my favorite part of the first movie.
Yes.
He was such an endearing character, and he was my favorite part of it. But yeah, I think the core four characters I liked. It's the peripheral characters that bothered me most with that movie.
Also, how the second movie makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
I don't even remember much of it.
There's a part where Lita Lestrange, played by Zoe Kravitz, steals a baby, and then that baby drowns. She kills the baby. But then the
I don't
baby
remember
she
that.
it's the very end. It's okay because it's part of 25 minutes of exposition that just gets dumped at the end.
Yeah.
The baby that she steals ends up being Dumbledore's long lost brother. But
What?
that was an accident. So she meant for the baby to go down, and she meant for one baby to die, which, by the way, very dark for a Harry Potter story. But then the baby that she stole ended up just so happening to be Dumbledore's lost brother. What are the odds of that? And there's a lot
Yeah.
of things in it that make no sense.
Eh.
I know.
Again, this is a big problem that I have with sequels is I like the world and I want to see more stories from it. Just like The Mandalorian, I always bring up The Mandalorian when it
Yeah.
comes to Star Wars, but I don't need you to continue the Harry Potter saga
No.
with Dumbledore and his backstory and all that stuff. I would have been fine with seeing the magical world in the United States, including the other schools around the world.
Yeah.
I think that's more interesting. I don't need it to connect to the old stories.
They're going to Brazil for the third Fantastic Beasts, so you're going to get Brazil.
Nice. That'll be fun.
Exactly. That just shrug. All right, was basically the feeling that everybody else had too.
Yeah. Anyway, going back to Lovecraftian. Sorry, I sent us on this tangent. So we went over the thing and what makes it cosmic horror. You told me about the strain. Going back to Guillermo
Mhm.
Del Toro, you told me about the strain. I've heard of it and I saw clips of it, but I hadn't seen anything from it. So I watched the first episode and it was intriguing. It was interesting.
Yeah, it was a show on FX that ran for a couple of years,
It was
back
like
in 2000
2014 to
2014.
2017.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But it's concerned mostly with vampires. It's about a viral outbreak in New York and an ancient strain of vampires that sort of are let loose on New York City. Not so much Lovecraftian in the cosmic horror sense. Again, it's more of an action type of plot. It's based on a comic book that Del Toro actually wrote or was part of writing.
It was very intriguing. Even just the premise, the way it starts. Do you know how it starts?
Yeah, I do. And
With
you
the
know,
plane
with the
landing and all that
plane
stuff?
and it
Yeah.
has a really good hook with the plane and all of them just, the entire plane dying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Del Toro does like vampires though. One of his first movies, Kronos, which
Mhm.
was a Mexican movie.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. If there's going to be a movie that would be remade that I would like to see him remake, it would be Kronos because Kronos was so low budget. It was his first thing.
Yeah, yeah.
I would really like to see him remake that just
I
because I
wanna
think it'd be interesting.
watch
Also dealing with vampires.
it was part of one of his trilogies. It was Kronos, then it was Devil's Backbone,
Devil's Backbone is interesting too.
and the last one was Pan's Labyrinth. I think that was sort of his, I guess, the equivalent of his Cornetto trilogy.
Mhm.
I wanna see the first 2 films from that because they're very interesting. He talks a lot about them because of the influence they had on his filmmaking moving forward, but I am interested to see sort of how his style developed over the years.
Devil's Backbone more than Kronos. Devil's Backbone, you really see Guillermo del Toro come into his own.
And it feels like he later produced The Orphanage
Devil's
that was
Backbone's
directed.
very much like The Orphanage.
Yeah,
I
and
love The
so,
Orphanage.
the Orphanage is beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
Again, that's another thing where Del Toro takes something that is seemingly frightening, and it turns out that the ghosts are the ones who are being, antagonized or
Mhm.
hurt and things like that. So, he is very much obsessed with taking the terrifying and then presenting it as something beautiful or is actually more in danger than the characters who are afraid of it.
Another thing that you wanted to talk about as well that just sparked into my mind when you said something beautiful that is also terrifying is the main image of the movie Annihilation, which is also takes its
Yeah.
cue from Lovecraft.
Annihilation, in my opinion, is probably the best, if not the most quintessential cosmic horror Lovecraftian film
Why?
because it was able to translate just about every theme prevalent in Lovecraft's work in a visual medium, which, as we've mentioned a lot during this episode, is difficult considering how ambiguous they are sometimes.
Annihilation is something that I think a lot of people it's popular now. It didn't make a lot of money at the box office, but I think a lot of people have seen it now.
It's actually based on a book. So if you haven't seen
Mhm.
it, it's based on a 3-part series with the same name, and it follows a biologist named Lena, played by Natalie Portman, and she joins an all-female expedition into this mysterious zone that they call the Shimmer. And the film opens on what looks like a meteor flying into the lighthouse somewhere in Florida,
Mhm.
and this orb-like energy field begins to grow out of the lighthouse or out of the crash site, and they call it the shimmer, basically. And as it grows, it begins to engulf the surrounding areas, and we're introduced to the shimmer 3 years after the meteor crashes into the lighthouse, and it's essentially taken over miles, if not acres, of land, and it's still growing. And unchecked, it would likely take over the world in a sense. And so this government agency called the Southern Reach is monitoring it and sending in teams. And at one point, they send in a team of Black Ops soldiers because every time they try to send communication in there or drones or anything like that, they
They
never
gone.
come out. Yeah, they're gone.
Black Ops soldiers,
Um,
they gone.
they gone. And one of those Black Ops soldiers is Lena's husband, who's played by Oscar Isaac.
He gone.
No, he comes back. He was the only thing that comes out of it.
Does he come back though, Andrew?
That's true. So they lose contact with the soldiers, and then the doctor, Dr. Ventress, who's basically overseeing this program, puts together a team, including herself, Lena, and then 3 other scientists, all female, because they wanted to try a different sort of approach to discovering what the shimmer is. So instead of using force like the military, they use scientists and
Mhm.
all females, basically, to see if there's a different outcome.
It is the most inspired by The Color Out of Space, though, because that is the exact opening of Lovecraft's The Color Out of Space. A meteor comes down.
Really?
Yeah, a meteor lands in back of a farm, and the purple glow cloud then
Hmm.
just starts to basically make them all go insane. Same premise in Annihilation.
And what I love about this movie is that in the beginning, when they first enter the shimmer, they notice the physical abnormalities first. And as they venture deeper toward the lighthouse or the crash site and deeper into the story, they begin to encounter the more metaphysical properties.
Mhm.
And so that progression from a structural standpoint is brilliant because they're first presenting the rules, or rather lack of rules, within the shimmer so as to set a foundation for the more complex, ambiguous ideas it reveals.
Yeah.
But before we go any further, I think we're going to end up going into spoilers. So
We're gonna spoil the movie Annihilation. It's a movie. I know we've been spoiling a lot of stuff the entire time, but this is a movie that kind of relies on plot twists and not knowing where it's going.
it also just came out.
It did come out. It's more
So
recent than most of the
yeah, it's
stuff we've
more
been talking
recent. So
about.
I'll put in the description time codes of when you can skip to.
Because I was thinking about Kane as well. We're getting into spoilers.
Yeah,
Spoilers. When Kane commits suicide, he's being confronted by the most Lovecraftian thing of all. It's the fact that his self-identity is just artificial.
exactly. I love that moment because I think he sums up that theme perfectly. He's about to kill himself in front of the camcorder, and he says, My mind is cut loose. I can't bear it."
Mhm.
And he seems so not only distressed, but the way he delivers that line, it's sort of like this surrender to the fact that he could never ground himself to reality because his reality has basically shattered. And more than that, I think that line is so pivotal because it also has a lot to do with our psyche. I feel as though we all have the ability to allow our minds to venture into frightening or dark territory, but we always reel ourselves back in just because of the social standards and morals that tether us to quote unquote reality. Even creative people don't just sever the line, they'll loosen up the leash to venture into the boundaries of the unknown. It's maybe why people like psychedelic drugs because they provide more latitude in that space. And I think about that often. Like, have you ever had that moment where your mind goes a little bit too far and you think, oh God, no, don't think about that. That's wrong. It's so interesting to me. And there's a line that touches on this in one of Lovecraft's short stories that I started to read. I didn't get to finish it. I believe it was The Outsider, where he says, when my mind momentarily threatens to reach beyond to the other. And I feel like that moment with Kane is what happens when the ropes tethering us to reality are completely severed and the crushing existential dread takes over.
Everyone in the movie Annihilation, though, seems like they want to die in some way. That's brought up in the movie too. When they're saying no one wants to commit suicide, they're all just everyone's just really no, I'm self-defeating isn't the word. What's the word I want?
No, it's self-destruction, right?
Self-destruction, thank you. And she hates herself too, though, because she's cheating on Kane. She's cheating on Oscar Isaac. And he knows that. And that's, I think, why he volunteers to go
Mhm.
into the Shimmer,
Yeah.
because he knows he's probably not going to come out, and he's fine with that because his reality, his marriage,
Yeah.
is gone. So he's perfectly fine with looking at her and going, I'm going to do this because you've already killed us. So what difference does it make to me?
Yeah.
And that
And
realization to her just creates even more self hatred inside of her to where she doesn't care. She's just going to go in anyway. And the guilt that she feels is the motivation for her to go in and find him.
exactly. And self-destruction is the central theme, hence Annihilation. And as
Yeah.
all good films do, it states the thesis of the film in a sense in the first scene with Natalie Portman when she's teaching a class on biology and she's showing a video of a cell dividing and explains that self-destruction is embedded in every living cell on Earth. And so all the characters were chosen for this suicide mission because they've been profiled by Ventress, the
Hmm.
head of the team studying the Shimmer. And like you said, they've all exhibited self-destructive behavior in the past. Tessa Thompson's character cuts herself. Gina Rodriguez was an addict. Uh, Cass lost her daughter to leukemia. Lena destroyed her marriage for no discernible reason. They even show them being fairly happy before she ends up sleeping with someone else. Even Ventress herself goes on the mission because she has cancer and she knows she won't survive.
Hmm.
And I love that they show how each of them is affected by the Shimmer and how they deal with it. Specifically, Tessa Thompson, when she tells Lena, Ventress wants to face it, you want to fight it. Lena being ex-military, and Tessa says, I don't think I want either of those things. And then she just walks into the field of plants that are shaped like humans and becomes one with the Shimmer in a sense. I thought that was a really cool concept too, that the plants were embedded with human Hox genes, the gene that define the body plan or physical structure of humans. But that scene is great because I think Tessa's character is the first to realize that the Shimmer doesn't really have a motivation or have malicious intent. It just exists, which again is a Lovecraftian theme, the ambivalence of nature and the cosmos. And when Lena is asked by the scientists in the end, what did it want? She says, I don't think it wanted anything or even knew that I was there. And he says, well, it was mutating our environment. It was destroying everything. And she answers with, it wasn't destroying, it was changing everything. It was making something new. And I think that's interesting that we as humans are doomed to self destruct, be it on a psychological or even biological level, whereas the Shimmer creates or grows. And the very downfall of the Shimmer is when Lena hands the clone of herself in the end a grenade and literally teaches it how to self destruct. Overall, I think this explored complex philosophical and scientific ideas in a way that was just fearless and effective. Even when it gets into the ambiguous scenes, like the one at the end with the black colorful cloud, it reminded me of 2001 Space Odyssey. But even that scene harkens back to the purple cloud that you're talking about in Lovecraft stories.
The purple cloud is calling to them, Andrew. It's saying, let's go crazy like Prince did in that video for Raspberry Beret. I mean, that's why it's so polarizing, though. That's a very polarizing movie. You talk to people about Annihilation, and a lot of people don't like it, which I was surprised because I really loved it.
Well, that's the thing is I think people have trouble distinguishing between something that doesn't make them feel good, like not liking the feeling it gives them, and whether or not the thing was actually good or not, as far as craft wise.
That's the problem, though, is can Lovecraft type stories work for the mainstream? Because the themes of a Lovecraft type story are not going to leave you feeling warm and fuzzy. It's not a Pixar movie where we're all just going to weep with joy at the end.
Yeah, yeah, and
Pixar movies
that's
Pixar movies are actually really sad too. Maybe that's not a great example, but
no, it's a great example. It always has a good ending. I mean, but that's why I feel as though Guillermo del Toro is not necessarily he hasn't fully committed to Lovecraft because his films usually end with a fairy tale ending, or at least something that is cathartic. This does not. This leaves you feeling uneasy.
empty almost.
It incites existential
It
crisis.
doesn't give you answers, or it doesn't give you easy answers.
The answers it gives are answers that we don't like to contemplate.
Maybe, maybe it gives you answers, but you just don't want them.
Honestly, even the scene with Kane at the end when she asks, "You're not Kane, are you?" and he says, "I'm not sure." I mean, that's a fundamental philosophical question. Is the mind your soul? Is the soul the mind, or are they separate? Because Kane at the end is a replication of his actual self with the same body, brain, and memories. But in saying he's not sure, the film in a way implies that maybe they are separate. and that his soul, or at least Cain's original soul, died with the last Cain, or the original one. I mean, it presents some heavy questions that can be understood by everyone, but not everyone wants to necessarily contemplate those ideas just because of their sheer weight.
I think by nature it can be for everyone, but not in a way that's going to be mass appeal. Because everyone can be confronted with the horror of self identity and, you know, internal crisis. But do you really want to watch a movie about it?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's
Wouldn't
like,
wouldn't you wouldn't you rather just watch Wall-E and be charmed by the robot?
well, and that's the thing is there are some people who watch film as an escape, and this is not an escape. If anything, this is confronting the
No.
very things that we use normal film or media to avoid. But in conclusion, I think Annihilation got the closest to translating Lovecraft's themes on the screen.
And I'm interested in this because the movie Bird Box, which was a Netflix movie that came out a couple of years ago, that was a big phenomenon when it came out.
Yeah, I mean, it was very similar to A Quiet Place.
Kind of, in that Bird Box does Lovecraftian horror maybe the most pure way, but probably not the best. I would say that Annihilation is a better movie, but Bird Box might do it in the most pure Lovecraftian way because Bird Box is a movie about a monster that invades the planet, where if you look at it, you go insane and you either kill yourself or you become almost like a spiritualist for this monster, where you try to make other people look at it to then drive themselves insane.
Well, that's the thing. The people who are already insane are drawn to it and
Yes.
almost have a cult like following in the same way that isn't there a cult like following of Cthulhu in the mythos?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's a pure adaptation of Lovecraftian horror. At the Mountains of Madness, from my understanding, in the end, one of the characters they're in the helicopter, they're flying away from it. And basically, when he looks back and sees the monster, he goes crazy, and that is essentially what Bird Box is. Is you
Mhm.
see this monster that is so horrific that it makes you want to kill yourself.
But you never see the monster. And I think
Exactly.
that is what people, very controversial movie, Bird Box. A lot of people didn't like it. It stirs passionate feelings in people. And the fact that it doesn't give you easy answers as to what even the monster is, I think is what angered a lot of people because it didn't give them easy answers.
It- and that's my problem is I think that horror and that's why Lovecraft's work can't be directly adapted is because visually it's not necessarily as terrifying as the idea of it.
Mhm.
And so once you show it, like the thing when you see those monsters, it's kind of hokey, right? And so there have been very few times where when you do see the creature you're impressed or terrified by it.
Right.
Like, I don't think even Stranger Things I love that they held off until maybe did you watch Stranger Things?
Yeah, I've seen all of Stranger Things. The first season of Stranger Things, though, is the most horror based in
Yeah.
it. The rest of it kind of becomes an action type movie,
Yeah, exactly,
or I
or,
should
like
say an action show,
mhm.
especially season 3, and I enjoyed season 3.
Yeah, I like season 3 a lot, and I'm actually excited for the 4th season. I think they ended season 3 where with this show, for some reason, every time it ends, I'm like, "I don't know where they're gonna go. Like, how where else do you go with this?" And they find a way to continue the storyline, which
Mhm.
I think is very interesting, but again, I like that they waited in the 1st season to even show a glimpse of the monster
Yeah.
because I think that that's important. I mean, that's what Hitchcock's whole method is based on is a closed door is scarier than an open door because with a closed door your mind fills in the blanks. And the lack of answers is the most Lovecraftian thing is the fact that it relies on your participation and your imagination to terrify you. Everyone has a different definition of what is scary to them. And so by translating it into only one thing, it might not have the effectiveness that maybe not seeing a monster would.
Yeah. Which, I mean, it Stephen King's It,
Mhm.
that's the whole point of it, is it's a shapeshifter from an alternate dimension that takes on what is supposed to be your biggest fear.
Yeah.
You know, it draws you in with something nice, supposed to be a clown, even though in the new It, the clown is terrifying, so that would never draw children in. This is my thing about It.
Yeah, I know.
I've told you before. Why would it become that? That's not going to draw any children in. That's just going to
Yeah.
scare children away. That's the opposite of what you want. Whatever. But then what it is really it's it turns out to be a giant spider.
Oh, yeah,
That is
yeah.
what it is.
You know, I've never seen any of their films. I just know about it.
Yeah.
I wanna see them, but
They cut out a lot of the Lovecraftian stuff in it also. They just take it to the pure he's a scary clown aspects of it and the kids running around having an adventure aspect of it. A lot of the Lovecraftian sort of monsters of it were cut out for good reason because it's kind of ridiculous. Does does the word Maturin mean anything to you?
Maturin?
Yes.
No.
Well, there's a reason why, Andrew, because in the book It, the mythology of It, Maturin is a giant turtle who is supposed to be one of the guardians, one of the old gods of the Stephen King universe, who vomited out the universe of It,
Yeah.
the universe the characters live in. And that is how the universe got created. And It, the monster, is the antithesis of Maturin. Maturin is a benevolent god
Okay.
versus It, which is like a devil character.
Yeah.
But yes, that is how the universe got created in Stephen King's world. A giant
Interesting.
turtle spat it out. Similar to the old gods of Lovecraft, though. You know, giant mythological almost creatures that exist and
Yeah.
are makes the human character so insignificant so as not to matter.
Wasn't there a Hulu show based on all of Stephen King's works?
Yes,
What was it
there
called?
was. I can't remember what it was called.
It's funny because when I saw the trailer for Lovecraft Country, I was like, "Oh, they basically did this, but
Castle
with
Rock.
Lovecraft." Yeah, Castle Rock,
It was
that's what
called
it
Castle
was.
Rock. And Castle Rock, the creation of Castle Rock in Stephen King's connected universe, very much the New England of Lovecraft's universe. Arkham,
Yeah.
like in Lovecraft Country, where they're going
Yeah.
to Arkham.
Mhm.
So Stephen King kind of does draw a lot from Lovecraftian stories. The most Lovecraftian story that I think Stephen King did is a short story called The Jaunt. Have you ever heard of it?
No, I haven't.
It's about a process where people can travel huge distances via teleportation. However, you have to be knocked unconscious via an anesthetic in order to do it. If you don't do it, you either die or you go insane. So, in this story, a family is traveling to Mars and they have a young son, and the couple, the parents hold their breath when they're getting the anesthetic to do the jaunt, but the boy doesn't. And so the boy is conscious during the process of the jaunt. And essentially, at the end, the mother starts screaming. The dad turns around and they go, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" The boy's gone insane and he screams, "It's longer than you think." And then he claws his eyes out. And that's the end. The meaning behind it being that the boy saw eternity, that he saw, some like he was just alive for so long that he alone with his thoughts that he went insane. But that's very Lovecraftian itself, is seeing into the eye of eternity and it just destroying you.
That is really terrifying, just that thought.
Mhm.
I mean, that was one of the things in Interstellar that had me shook was the part where they come back from the water planet and the dude that was left behind was like,
Yes.
"Where have you been? I've been here for years.
It's been
I
20
tried s
years.
Yeah, I tried going into hibernation. The hibernation capsule stopped working." Like, that is so it's terrifying to think about. That's a really, really I wanna read that. The Jaunt?
The jaunt, it's not very long. It's only
That's
a
a
couple of
very interesting,
it's only a couple of
premise.
pages, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've ruined it for everybody listening and you, so,
No,
I
but I
guess.
mean, like, again, that's the thing about cosmic horror is it's more the experience of it.
Mhm. It's weird to me that Stephen King became as popular as he did. Because Stephen King has weird stuff. He's got a giant turtle that spit out the universe. It's amazing that because he is the horror author. So much of his
He
stuff has been
is.
adapted, The Shining we talked about,
The Mist,
The Mist. The Mist is
Carrie.
Lovecraftian in that way.
Yeah.
I think that's why he became so popular, because the very first things that he wrote were really digestible. Because Carrie is a revenge story about a girl who was bullied. Salem's Lot was his second movie. I'm sorry, his second book. And that was essentially just a vampire story. Vampires are
Yeah.
easy. And then the third was The Shining, and The Shining is really just a haunted house story.
Yeah, and again, they're easily digestible, like you said, but they're also easily translated on the screen.
And then he wrote Maximum Overdrive, where the air conditioning in a building comes alive.
Really?
That's part of Maximum Overdrive.
Interesting.
That one doesn't get talked about a lot. You know what? They talk a lot about The Shining. Maximum Overdrive, not as much. Who's to say which is better?
Yeah, we don't talk about that one. Anyway, I think that does it for this week's episode, yeah?
Did we come to any conclusions in this episode? I don't think so.
Dude, it's us. We're all over the place.
There's never a conclusion.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for listening, and please let us know if there are any themes you'd like us to dive into, or if there are any films you'd like us to review. We make this podcast for you, and if there's anything you'd like to hear about, please do not hesitate to let us know. But for this week's episode, what are your favorite cosmic horror films or films inspired by H.P. Lovecraft? Have you seen any of the ones that we mentioned today? Do you agree or disagree with anything that we discussed? Let us know on YouTube, Instagram, or Twitter. You can find all those links on channel8.5.com. That's channel8.5, completely spelled out.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider liking and sharing with family and friends.
We have new episodes every Thursday. Until next time, my name is Joe Galino.
And I'm Andrew Hanna, and this is Channel 8.5.